Hello, my name is Cormac and I work at the Law School of the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I wanted to thank Giuseppe Martinico and Cristina Fazzone for the opportunity to present and to talk about my new book on the Diritti Comparativi blog. The book in question is this one. It's called New Constitutional Horizons Towards a Pluralist Constitutional Theory, and it was published earlier this year with Oxford University Press. What the book tries to do is to develop a pluralist constitutional theory. Now, what does this mean? Well, it sets up or starts by thinking about what it calls the circumstances of constitutional pluralism. And this, it argues, is a series of phenomena about our contemporary world, our legally globalized world, which raises questions for how we understand constitutional law and constitutional theory. And it does this in two particular ways, the book argues. Firstly, with regard to the idea of legal systems. So the point about the circumstances of constitutional pluralism with respect to legal systems is that as jurists, as legal theorists, as constitutional lawyers, as judges, as officials, we're all increasingly called upon and have to reckon with the fact of more than one legal system. So we have to think about, interpret, and often apply more than one legal system in our day-to-day activities. The second feature of the circumstances of constitutional pluralism the book highlights are this plurality of authority claims. So no longer do we have one single type of authority claim coming paradigmatically from the state, but there are different institutions, different governing entities at different levels, which also make authority claims over the same subject matter and peoples. And this, the book argues, is a fact of our modern world, in our legally globalized world. So the book asks what we need to do to our understandings and our concepts and our theories of constitutional law and constitutional theory to theorize this fact about the world, these circumstances of constitutional pluralism. And the reason we need to do this is because our core concepts of constitutional law and constitutional theory are monistic, in the sense that they usually only relate to or think about one type of legal system and one type of authority claim. And these types of legal system and authority claim tend to be those of the state. So the law and the legal system of a state and the particular types of authority claims that have developed around the state as it has developed in history. So the book attempts to develop and adapt our concepts and theories to take better account of the circumstances of constitutional pluralism, that is, being forced to think in a more pluralistic way about law and legal systems, and also being forced to think about, in a more pluralistic way, about authority and authority claims in the contemporary world. So to do this, the book is divided into two parts, reflecting two broad themes of constitutional law and constitutional theory, the idea of legality and the idea of legitimacy. Here, the idea of legality represents the idea of a constitution as a legal system. So it looks at the series of questions which the circumstances of constitutional pluralism raise for our understanding of a constitution as a legal system. In doing this, it draws on the classic accounts of legal system developed by the likes of Kelsen, Hart, and Raz, because they are the most developed accounts of understanding law as a legal system, to ask whether they're apt to capture the circumstances of constitutional pluralism in the form of being forced to think about more than one legal system at a time that I identified earlier. It asks how they handle non-state forms of legal systems, which of course are central to the circumstances of constitutional pluralism, because under the circumstances of constitutional pluralism, state legal systems are simply one among a number of different legal systems that we have to think about. And most of those other legal systems, particularly at the transnational level, are not considered state legal systems. And it also asks whether these accounts are sufficient to allow us to distinguish, or in the more technical terms, individuate legal systems. That relates to the question of how we tell systems apart, which is a significant and necessary feature of legal and constitutional pluralism. So these are the themes that are dealt with in the first part of the book, and the book at this point concludes that these accounts are adaptable to the circumstances of constitutional pluralism, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel in terms of understanding law and constitution as a legal system in order to address the challenges of the circumstances of constitutional pluralism, but we do need to adapt and develop them. And this part of the book makes suggestions as to how we might go about doing that. The second part of the book relates to legitimacy, and this is the idea of constitutionalism as a theory of legitimate order. So here we're more squarely in the domain of normative theory or political theory. So it puts forward constitutionalism as a political theory of legitimate government. It starts by looking at the various understandings of constitutionalism that prevail in the literature, such as classically two main types of thinking about constitutionalism as constitutive constitutionalism, that is constitutionalism as establishing the legitimate foundations of authority, or alternatively regulative constitutionalism, that is constitutionalism as legitimating authority by limiting or restricting the abuse of power by a given authority. And it reviews critiques of the idea of constitutionalism as a theory of legitimate authority. The first, it identifies three. The first of those is that constitutionalism as a normative theory of authority is not useful in general, or not useful in the circumstances of constitutional pluralism, because the concept itself is so unclear. Right? We disagree about what we mean by constitutionalism. And this disagreement, I think, is exemplified in the dichotomy that I've just talked about, the distinction between constitutive and regulative constitutionalism. The second critique of constitutionalism as a normative theory of authority is that it tries to illegitimately promote a contested political theory. And the political theory in this case is liberalism. And if we think about the economic sphere, and particularly those types of regulatory orders that have developed at the transnational level, neoliberal economic theory, through the idea of new constitutionalism. So constitutionalism under this critique has been attacked for trying to smuggle in a contested and tendentious and for many unjust or oppressive political theory under the veneer of neutrality, or making sort of bogus claims to legitimacy. And for this reason, it's a problematic concept. The third critique that it identifies is that constitutionalism was unsuitable for non-state contexts. So it is a concept and a theory which has developed and grown up alongside the development of states. And so we can't export it to non-state contexts. And of course, if we think about the circumstances of constitutional pluralism, as I already suggested, most of the other legal systems, but also authority claims, are not those of states. And so trying to export a concept that is developed within the state creates problems for the concept and makes it less useful to our circumstances of constitutional pluralism. And this critique is exemplified in the No Demos thesis, which it develops and explains at length. So this second part of the book tries to address these concerns by reference to constitutionalism as an interpretative concept. That is, that the best way to think about these critiques and address them is to present or approach the concept of constitutionalism as an interpretive concept, as developed and promoted primarily in the work of Ronald Dworkin. So as Dworkin famously said, an interpretive concept is a concept that we all agree as political value, but we disagree about the details. And so when we disagree about a particular a concept of political value like constitutionalism, we are presenting rival best interpretations of what that political value is. And it argues that this is a useful way of thinking about constitutionalism as a normative political theory because it helps address the critiques that I just outlined to think about constitutionalism as a normative political theory which is suited to the circumstances of constitutional pluralism. First of all, it helps bring clarity to the disagreement that we have about the concept of constitutionalism. Paradigmatically between constitutive and regulative constitutionalism, but there are a lot of subdivisions within that particular disagreement. And it does this by bringing us all on the same page about what it is that we're disagreeing about. and the book argues what we're disagreeing about are contested or rival interpretations of what legitimate governing authority requires. And this involves our disagreement being characterized as simply just talking past each other or succumbing to what Dworkin famously called the semantic sting. It argues also that by thinking about constitutionalism as an interpretive concept also releases the concept from a tendentious, neoliberal, contested political philosophy, because it shows that our disagreements are broader than a given political theory, and that they are all connected somehow to the idea of legitimate governing authority, and that ultimately what we're trying to do is understand these rival best interpretations of what legitimate governing authority requires. Finally, it addresses the no demos thesis, which it characterizes as being concerned with idealization and normative theorizing. And it argues that idealization and normative theorizing isn't a problem in itself, provided that we're clear on the purposes of what we're trying to do in our theories, and that our level of abstraction or generalization are suited to those particular purposes. So this part concludes that constitutionalism, seen as an interpretive concept, creates a new life for the concept of constitutionalism as a normative theory, which is a useful tool in approaching the many questions of legitimacy and authority which emerge under the circumstances of constitutional pluralism. And the book as a whole, I conclude, tries to make constitutionalism and constitutional theory ready for our contemporary world of constitutional pluralism and the many, many political challenges which we currently face. Thank you for listening.